The morning I finally stopped shaking long enough to look at myself in the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My eyes were swollen. My hands still smelled faintly of the lavender hand cream I'd rubbed in nervously the night before, sitting in the parking lot of the hospital, reading a text message that felt like a physical blow to the chest. A text from my own daughter, sent at 11:47 p.m., 2 days before her white coat ceremony, the ceremony I had spent $63,000 to make possible. The text said, "Mom, I know you're planning to come Friday, but honestly, it might be better if you just watched the live stream. The venue is small and I want it to be mostly my friends and Derek's family. You understand, right?" I read it 4 times. Then I set my phone face down on the passenger seat and sat in the dark for a very long time. I want to tell you what happened after that, but first you need to understand who I am, not who my daughter decided I was, who I actually am. My name is Margaret. I am 64 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in a house I bought by myself in 1998 when my daughter was 11 years old and my husband had been gone for 3 years. Not dead, just gone. He left for a woman he met at a sales conference in Phoenix, and he took with him every joint account we had, most of the furniture, and any illusion I had that my life was going to go the way I planned. What he didn't take was my daughter, Claire. And he didn't take my stubbornness. I had a nursing degree I hadn't used in 6 years because we'd agreed I would stay home while she was small. So I went back. I picked up night shifts at a rehabilitation center on the east side of Columbus. I picked up weekend shifts too. I put Claire in after-school care, and I came home at 7 in the morning smelling like antiseptic, and I made her scrambled eggs, and I helped her with her homework before I let myself sleep for 4 hours. Then I did it again. For years, that was my life. Work, Claire, sleep. Work, Claire, sleep. But I didn't complain, because watching her grow was the one thing in my life that felt entirely, completely worth it. She was sharp. Sharper than anyone I knew. By the time she was in high school, she was talking about becoming a doctor. Not in a vague daydreaming way, in the way where she had already researched which pre-med programs had the best MCAT outcomes and which medical schools had the strongest match rates for the specialties she wanted. She wanted to be a cardiologist. I cannot describe to you what it felt like to hear my daughter say the word cardiologist at 16 years old. After everything, after the divorce and the double shifts and the years of choosing between a new winter coat for myself and her school trip to Washington, D.C. I chose the school trip, by the way. I wore the old coat another 2 winters. She got into Ohio State on a partial scholarship. I took out a parent loan for the rest. Then she got into medical school at Case Western. The scholarship didn't follow her there. I refinanced my house. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I refinanced the house I had worked 6 years of night shifts to pay down so that my daughter could become a doctor. And I did it without hesitation. I did it with joy. Because she was going to be a cardiologist. My daughter, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my lap while I studied my own nursing textbooks, by the time she matched into a residency program at a prestigious hospital in Boston, I had spent, between the undergrad loan, the medical school refinancing, the board exam fees, the residency interview travel I helped cover, the apartment deposit in Boston, and the professional wardrobe she needed, I had spent just over $63,000 out of pocket on her education and her launch into the life she wanted. I'm not telling you this so you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this so you understand the full picture, because my daughter has never once, not in all those years, suggested that she didn't know where that money came from. She knew. She said thank you. She cried at her medical school graduation and hugged me and said, "I couldn't have done this without you, Mom." I believed her. That was 8 months before the text message in the parking lot. Let me tell you about Derek. Claire met Derek during her 2nd year of residency. He was a pharmaceutical sales representative, good-looking, confident, the kind of man who always seems to be performing slightly even in casual conversation. He drove a very clean car. He had a firm handshake. His family was from the North Shore of Boston, old money. The kind of family that had opinions about which fork to use and where to summer as a verb. I met them, Derek's parents, Richard and Constance, at a dinner in Boston when Claire and Derek had been together about 4 months. Constance wore a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Richard barely looked at me during the meal. When Claire mentioned that I was a nurse, Constance smiled in a way that wasn't really a smile and said, "How wonderful. Such a noble profession." I noticed things at that dinner. The way Constance addressed her questions about Claire's future plans to Derek, rather than to Claire. The way Richard asked Derek, not Claire, what her specialty focus would be. The way Derek laughed a little too loudly at his own father's jokes. I noticed these things, and then I told myself I was being unfair. That I was projecting. That I was a 63-year-old woman from Columbus, Ohio, and I needed to stop sizing up people based on one dinner. Claire seemed happy. That was the only thing that mattered. They got engaged 11 months later. Derek proposed at a rooftop restaurant in Back Bay. He did not ask me beforehand, which I told myself was modern and fine. Claire called me from the restaurant, still crying happy tears, and I sat on my couch in Columbus and cried right along with her. Then the planning began. Claire called me 2 weeks after the engagement to talk about the wedding. It was going to be in Newport, Rhode Island, in September, at a historic venue that Constance had already researched. The guest list was going to be around 200 people. When Claire mentioned the estimated cost, I set down my coffee cup. "Claire," I said carefully, "that's over $120,000. "I know," she said. "Derek's parents are contributing $50,000. They said that's their max." I waited. "And Derek?" I asked. "He's still paying off his car and some credit card debt." "Mom, I've been in residency. I don't have savings like that either. I want to be completely honest with you about what happened in my chest during that phone call." There was a very clear, rational voice that said, "You have already spent $63,000. You have a refinanced mortgage. You are 63 years old, and your retirement account is not where it should be. The answer here is no." And there was another voice. The one that remembered her at 11 years old making me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day with slightly burned toast and an enormous amount of pride. The one that remembered her calling me from the library at midnight during board exam prep just to hear my voice. The one that had been saying yes to Claire for 23 years without ever once regretting it. I said I would contribute $40,000 toward the wedding. I said it clearly, and I set that as my limit. Claire thanked me and said she loved me, and I felt, in that moment, genuinely good about it. What I did not fully understand yet was that in Constance's world, a contribution was an invitation to direct. Over the following weeks, Constance began sending emails to Claire, copied to me, about vendors, about color palettes, about the menu, about the ceremony program. She had opinions about everything. She had a preferred florist. She had thoughts about the font on the invitations. When I suggested a caterer I had found online with excellent reviews, she responded to Claire's forwarded message with 2 words, "Too casual." I was not invited to the venue walkthrough. I found out about it afterward when Claire mentioned it in passing. When I said I would have liked to come, Claire said, "Oh, it was really just a quick thing with the coordinator. Constance knows her already. I let it go." I was not consulted about the ceremony music, or the rehearsal dinner location, which Derek's family was hosting, which I understood, but I was also not told the dress code until 4 days before, and by then the dress I'd ordered online had not yet arrived. I let that go too. 4 months before the wedding, Claire called me and said she had found her dress. She was breathless with excitement. It was at a bridal boutique in Boston. It was, and here she paused, $8,000, Mom. I know that's a lot. But it's so beautiful. It's exactly what I always imagined. And I said yes. Of course I said yes. I gave her my credit card number over the phone. I want you to understand something. I was not being foolish. I was not a pushover. I was a woman who had built her entire adult life around one central belief, that her daughter's dreams were worth every sacrifice. I had held that belief through a divorce and 2 decades of night shifts and a refinanced mortgage, and it had always felt true. I flew to Boston in August to see the dress and have a small shopping trip with Claire, just the 2 of us. I was looking forward to it more than I can properly express. We hadn't had real one-on-one time in almost a year. When I arrived at her apartment, Constance was there. I don't know if Claire had forgotten to tell me or had chosen not to. I walked in with my overnight bag, and there was Constance sitting on Claire's couch with a cup of tea and a binder full of wedding vendor contacts. She greeted me with that not-quite smile and said, "Margaret, how was the drive?" I had flown. She knew I had flown. We went to the boutique together. Claire tried on the dress. It was stunning. I will absolutely give it that. It was ivory with long sleeves and a cathedral train, and when she stood in front of that mirror, she looked extraordinary. I started to cry, genuinely happily cry. Constance said, "We were thinking ivory was perhaps a safer choice than pure white, given the venue lighting." I had not been part of that we. On the drive back, Constance sat in the front seat of Claire's car, and they talked about the seating chart. I sat in the back. I watched the back of my daughter's head, and I thought about the burned toast on Mother's Day. I thought about the midnight phone calls from the library. I thought, this is just a stressful season. Once the wedding is over, things will settle. I flew home the next morning and did not say anything to Claire about how I felt. That was my mistake. Not the money, not the dress. That was the mistake. The long, slow pattern of swallowing things that deserved to be said. 3 weeks before the wedding, Claire called to tell me about the seating arrangement for the reception. I was at table 11. Derek's family was at the head table with the wedding party. I was at table 11 with 2 of Derek's cousins I had never met and a colleague of Derek's father. "Claire," I said, "I'm your mother." "Mom, the head table is just the wedding party. It's standard. The parents usually sit near the front, near the couple. Richard and Constance are at table 2. It's right by the dance floor, and I'm at table 11. A pause. "It's a beautiful table, Mom." By the window. I did not sleep well that night. I called my friend Patricia the next morning and told her everything. Patricia has known me for 30 years. She said without hesitation, "Margaret, wake up." I didn't want to hear it. I told her she didn't understand the full picture. I told her Claire was under enormous stress. I told her that things would be different after the wedding. Then came the text, 2 days before the white coat ceremony, not the wedding. I want to be clear about that. This happened before the wedding even took place. Claire had just completed her residency and was being formally inducted as an attending physician. A white coat ceremony at the hospital with a reception afterward. I had already bought my train ticket from Columbus. I had already bought a new blouse. "Mom, I know you're planning to come Friday, but honestly, it might be better if you just watched the live stream. The venue is small, and I want it to be mostly my friends and Derek's family. You understand, right?" I sat in that parking lot for a long time, and then something happened that I cannot entirely explain, except to say that it felt like a light coming on in a room that had been dark for a very long time. It wasn't anger exactly. It was clarity. A cold, clean, absolute clarity. I thought about the $63,000 for her education. I thought about the $40,000 I had committed to the wedding. I thought about the $8,000 dress on my credit card. I thought about sitting in the back seat while Constance sat in the front. I thought about table 11. I thought about the burned toast. And I thought, I have been paying for a seat at a table I was never actually invited to. I drove home. I did not watch the live stream. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop, and I wrote down every outstanding payment I had not yet made toward the wedding. The remaining florist balance. The contribution toward the catering deposit that was due the following week. The hotel room block I had agreed to help subsidize for out-of-town guests. It came to just over $22,000 in payments not yet made. I called my bank. I want to be honest with you about what I felt during that phone call. People might expect me to say I felt powerful or vindicated. What I actually felt was grief, real, deep grief. Not for the money, for the version of the relationship I had believed in for so long, for the mother-daughter story I had been telling myself, in which all the sacrifice and all the love were building towards something mutual, something lasting. I grieved that story while I was on hold, listening to the bank's automated music. When the representative came on the line, I canceled every pending payment I could cancel. The florist balance, the catering deposit contribution, the hotel block subsidy. I also called the bridal boutique and, after a very uncomfortable conversation, arranged to dispute the charge on the dress, citing a miscommunication about authorization, which was not a lie. I had authorized a purchase I now understood had never been made in good faith. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. I did not attend the white coat ceremony. Claire called the next morning at 7:15. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 7:20. And again. At 7:40, I listened to the voicemails. The first one was confused. The second one was concerned. By the third, her voice had changed into something harder. The florist had called her. The catering coordinator had called her. The boutique had called her. I called her back at 8 o'clock. "Mom, what is happening?" Her voice was shaking. "I canceled the payments," I said. I kept my voice very even, the ones that hadn't been processed yet. "Why?" "What? Mom, the wedding is in 3 weeks. I know when the wedding is." "You can't just, the florist is threatening to, Claire." I stopped her. "I need you to read me back the text you sent me 2 nights ago." Silence. "Read it back to me," I said again quietly. "And while you're reading it, I want you to think about the $8,000 dress on my credit card. I want you to think about the $40,000 I committed to your wedding. I want you to think about the $63,000 I spent over the last decade so that you could have that white coat that I was not invited to watch you receive." The silence on the line was long enough that I thought she might have hung up. Then she said, very quietly, "Mom, I love you," I said. "I have loved you every single day of your life, and I always will. But I will not pay for a celebration I'm not welcome at, and I will not keep paying for a relationship in which I sit at table 11. I heard her breath catch. "That's not, Mom. That seating chart was Constance's. Then Constance can pay the florist." Another long silence. And then, unexpectedly, my daughter started to cry. Not the hard defensive crying of someone who is angry. The other kind. The kind that means something is breaking open. "I'm sorry," she said. And she said it again and again. I did not rush to comfort her. For perhaps the first time in her life, I let her sit in the full weight of what she had done without immediately moving to soften it for her. I had been softening things for her for 23 years. I had been absorbing things, shrinking, moving to the back seat. Not anymore. We talked for almost 2 hours that morning. It was the most honest conversation we had had in years, maybe ever. Claire told me things I had suspected but never heard her say out loud, that Constance had made her feel like her background was something to be managed, that Derek had, more than once, suggested that I might seem out of place at certain events, that she had let those voices get louder than her own, that she had been so desperate to fit into the life she was building that she had started editing out the life she came from. She said, "I think I've been ashamed of where we started, and that is the most shameful thing I've ever done." I believed her. But I also knew that believing her and immediately returning to where we had been were 2 completely different things. I told Claire I would not be reinstating the canceled payments. I told her that if she and Derek wanted to move forward with the wedding as planned, they would need to cover the remaining costs themselves, or ask Constance and Richard for additional support, given their stated belief in the occasion. I told her I would attend the wedding. I would sit wherever they put me, but I would not write another check until I felt like a mother again and not a line item in someone else's budget. Derek called me that afternoon. I will give him this, he was more straightforward than I expected. He said he owed me an apology for letting his family's attitudes affect how Claire had been treating me. He said he had not realized until Claire showed him the full accounting of what I had contributed, the actual scope of what I had done. He said the number made him feel sick. I told him I appreciated him saying so. I told him I hoped he meant it. Constance did not call me. But 3 days later, Claire told me that her future in-laws had agreed to cover the remaining wedding costs. I imagine that conversation was not easy. I did not feel victorious about it. I felt tired and sad, and also, underneath the sadness, something that felt, cautiously, like the beginning of solid ground. The wedding happened. It was beautiful, genuinely, objectively beautiful, in that Newport venue with the harbor light coming through the windows in the late afternoon. I cried during the ceremony. I danced at the reception. I was moved to table 4, not table 2, not the head table, table 4. But Claire came to find me twice during the reception, not for photos, not for obligation, just to sit with me for a few minutes. Once she brought me a piece of the appetizers because she remembered I hadn't eaten on the plane. Once she just sat down and held my hand without saying anything, and we watched Derek dancing with his grandmother, and she leaned her head briefly against my shoulder the way she used to do when she was small. That mattered more to me than any table number. We are not fully repaired. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think sometimes these stories end too neatly and real life doesn't end neatly. Claire and I are in the process of rebuilding something, more carefully than before, with more honesty than before, with less of me absorbing things that need to be said out loud. She is seeing a therapist. I started seeing one too because it turns out that 20 plus years of quietly swallowing your own needs leaves a residue, and I have some work to do. Derek is trying. He is genuinely, effortfully trying, and I have chosen to let that count. Constance and I are cordial. That is all we will ever be, and I have made peace with that. What I want to tell you, the thing I could not have articulated while I was sitting in that parking lot in the dark, reading that text message for the 4th time, is this: there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from loving someone so much that you stop including yourself in the equation. I had been so focused on making Claire's life possible that I had forgotten to make my own life livable. I had mistaken being needed for being valued. I had mistaken paying for belonging. The money was never the point. The money was just the clearest evidence of a pattern I had allowed to go on too long. The point was that I had raised a brilliant, capable woman, and somewhere along the way I had let her and myself forget that I was a person and not a resource. I am 64 years old. I still work. I still live in my house in Columbus. My retirement account is still not where I would like it to be, but I sleep better than I have in years. I call Claire on Sunday evenings and she answers, and we talk about real things. Last month, she called me on a Tuesday, just to tell me about a patient she was proud of. She didn't need anything. She just wanted to tell me. That phone cost nothing. It was worth everything. If you are a mother who has spent years making yourself smaller so someone else could feel larger, I want you to hear this. The love was real. The sacrifice was real. None of that was wasted. But you are also a person. You have always been a person. And it is never, I promise you it is never, too late to remember that. There is a cause and effect to every story like mine, even when we can't see it clearly while we're living inside it. I spent over 2 decades pouring everything I had, my savings, my sleep, my silence, into a relationship I believed was mutual. And for a long time, I told myself that the pouring was enough. That love measured in sacrifice was the highest form of love there was. But what I understand now, sitting on the other side of that parking lot in that phone call, is that I had confused endurance with wisdom. I had mistaken the ability to absorb pain for the virtue of being good. The truth is that every time I said nothing, when I sat in the back seat, when I accepted table 11, when I handed over my credit card without asking a single question, I was not being loving. I was being absent. Absent from my own life. Absent from the honest conversation my daughter and I needed to have years before it reached a breaking point. My silence did not protect her. It protected a dynamic that was slowly hollowing us both out. What I have come to believe is this. Real integrity is not just about how hard you work or how much you give. It is about whether your actions are honest, whether they reflect what you actually value, or whether they reflect what you are afraid to lose. For years, I acted out of fear dressed up as love. Fear that if I said no, I would lose her. Fear that my limitations, my background, my income, my Columbus zip code made me less worthy of a place at the table. I let that fear make my decisions. And fear, unchecked, always leads somewhere smaller. Claire's growth did not begin when she became a doctor. It began the morning she sat with the full weight of what she had done and chose honesty over defensiveness. That took real courage, the kind that has nothing to do with credentials or status and everything to do with character. I am prouder of that phone call, of her voice breaking open in genuine remorse, than I have ever been of any award or title. because intelligence without moral honesty is just a sharper tool for self-deception. And my own growth, the part I did not expect, came from finally understanding that setting a limit is not the opposite of love. It is, in fact, one of love's most disciplined expressions. It says, I value this relationship enough to be truthful about what is breaking it. It says, I respect you enough not to pretend. Margaret did not give up on her daughter. She gave up on the version of the relationship that required her to disappear. Those are not the same thing. One is abandonment. The other is the first honest step toward something real. If there is anything I want you to carry from this story, it is simply that the people who shaped you, who worked double shifts and refinanced their homes and sat in the back seat without complaining, deserve to be seen, not managed, not minimized, seen. And if you are the one who has been sitting in the back seat, know this: clarity is not cruelty. Saying what is true, even when it costs something, is how broken things begin to heal. It is never too late to stop shrinking. It is never too late to take up the space you were always meant to occupy.